Okay, today what we're going to do is change the camshaft on a 2014 Honda Grom. First thing you're going to want to do is loosen these two bolts. And remove them. Okay, next thing to do is remove the cam sprocket cover here. Sometimes they can stick a little bit. You're not going to be able to just grab it and pull it off because it's got an O-ring. What I recommend is you be very careful, very gentle. Take a screwdriver, stick it in the bolt hole. Don't get the threads that are actually in the cylinder head, but actually stop short of that. This will give you a little leverage to pry on. Now gently pull and pry, and it'll eventually work its way to where it'll pop out. Okay, now that you have that out of the way, you can move to the engine plugs, which you're going to need to access the bolt for the crankshaft to be able to turn the engine over. There's no real technical aspect to this. It's just a couple plugs with O-rings. You got to be careful with these because they're kind of cheap pot metal. They're not real stout, so you don't want to put them on with a whole lot of torque. And if you can't get them to move, you kind of want to be careful with breaking them loose because you end up stripping the heads out of them, and then you'll be buying a new plug, which I need to buy better upgraded plugs anyways. Next part of this process you could have done at the beginning. You could have taken the plugs out to begin, but this is just the process I'm going through, so if you want to criticize my process, that's fine, but the end result will be the same. Next step is going to be take a 17 mil socket and put it on the crank nut, and you're going to turn the engine over until these two markings line up. You're going to see a notch in the cylinder head, and there is a marking on the cam pulley itself. So you want to rotate the engine until those line up. There's also another way to verify is inside this little window. So you're going to have a T with a dash next to it. That'll mark your top dead center. Really, for this exercise, and there's only one time per 2 revolutions that this is going to be in this position, because the camshaft turns at half the speed of the crankshaft. So once every 4 cycles, these lines are going to mark. These marks will line up. So you really don't need to worry about the position of the crankshaft or that timing mark, although you can see it there with the light reflecting. So that's a perfect shot of that right there. That's the mark you're looking for. If you're doing any other work on the engine, you want top dead center, that's the mark you're looking for right there. That is piston top dead center. Both valves are closed. That is right in between the compression and power stroke right there. Okay, as we move along, next step in the process is going to be to grab a 14 mil socket, and you're going to go underneath the engine. You're going to locate the cam chain tensioner bolt. This is the one that's at an angle. A lot of people make a mistake their first oil change and remove this, and they have a spring and a plunger pop out, and they have no idea where it goes, which way it goes, or what they did. The one that's at an angle is your cam chain tensioner. The one that's flat is the drain bolt on the other side. So I've already broken this loose for video's sake because I'm doing it one-handed and I don't want to pull my bike off the jack stand. So you're going to loosen this, just back it off a couple threads. You don't want to take it to where it pops out. You're just relieving the pressure on the cam chain, so when you go to take this pulley off the camshaft and you slip that chain off the pulley or sprocket, whichever you want to call it, it makes it a little easier on you. Okay everybody, this is where it starts to get interesting. Now you'll notice that I have the ratchet positioned against the shifter peg and it's on the crank bolt. The reason we do that is to break the bolt loose on the cam pulley. We've got to, of course, stop the engine from rotating. Now it's not a big deal if it moves a little bit because you're only going to loosen this bolt. If it moves out of position, just leave it on there, rotate the engine back over, put it in the back in the spot. But whole reason for that is to keep, if you had a friend, you could have them hold it. I don't have a friend, I only have one hand because I'm holding the camera. So now we're going to break this loose. Next task, of course, once you have that loose, you can take off the, I guess I call them rocker arm covers. So where you pull the covers off, do your valve adjustment, because you're going to have to back the rocker arms off in order to get the camshaft out. In my case, I'm probably going to remove the rocker arms and reinstall them with a new cam. So you don't want the exhaust lobe catching the edge of the intake rocker as it comes out. By the way, I probably failed to mention the nut here, the bolt for cam sprocket, is 12 millimeter. Of course, what else? It's a Honda. I think when I was younger I had a four-wheeler that was put together with completely with 12 millimeter bolts. I think it's Honda's favorite size fastener. Beside that point, we're going to take the bolt out. You have to be conscious of the washer that's under this. If you lose track of it and it sticks to the pulley and you drag this bolt out, you could, it's a possibility you could lose it into the crankcase. So you want to make sure, do not let that washer stick to the pulley, and make sure it comes with a bolt. Okay, now take one last shot, make sure that our lines are marked, our marks are lined up, which they are. And now it just takes a little bit of wiggling to get this sprocket slash pulley off. Okay, try to get a little light on it. Once you get the sprocket off, I just normally, pull as much of the chain out as you can, let it dangle out there so it doesn't, it's not going to fall back in because there's a guide wheel here that won't allow it to fall back into the crankcase. But to keep as much, slack out of it as you can. I've reinstalled the bolt here for kind of like something to grab onto and pull once you get this backing plate out. This plate actually holds both the rocker shafts and retains the camshaft. So that comes out, and that is a 10 millimeter bolt. And I think I need both hands for this, so I'm going to stop the video here and pick it up after I get that loosened at least. Okay, got the retainer out. Now what you're going to want to note is the orientation of the flats on this bracket, as well as it's marked out. So you can't really screw this up, but more importantly, you note the orientation of the rocker shafts, as their flats are orientated to match up with that bracket. Little tip here, when you take the sprocket off, the cam kind of rocks back and rests at the back of the intake lobe, so it kind of takes the stress off of the exhaust rocker shaft. So you can pull this one out first. It starts to come out reasonably easy. You can grab it with your finger and just pull on it. You have a little bit of suction due to the oil. I'm going to have to stop here, of course, because I need both hands to catch the rocker arm when it comes out. And you want to be very careful because the rocker arms, where the shaft goes through, have roller bearings, so you don't want to bump them or drop them on the floor. Have needle bearings rolling all over the floor. And then you can kind of do the same thing with the intake is you can just take the cam and roll it so there's no tension or any pressure on that intake rocker, and you can do the same with the intake rocker shaft. So I'll be back after I get both of those out. Note that the rockers are stamped, this one with an I and this one with a E. So of course, intake and exhaust, do not mix them up, they are different. And now the fun part, which the cam should just pull out. Probably has a little bit of suction due to the oil, but that bolt makes a handy dandy cam removal tool. Something to grab onto. There, it starts to, there. And be very gentle. And there comes the stock piece. So you can see the compression release, which the new cam does not have, and that will reduce its rotating mass. I can already tell because I've already handled the stock cam, and this is much heavier, so you're going to reduce the rotating mass quite a bit. Okay, here's our new Daniel Crowder Racing cam, and you guys can make fun of me all you want, but we have some roller bearings here, and instead of just squirting oil in it, I'm going to take and dunk the whole thing in oil. Make sure that oil gets everywhere and not have to worry about it. See the bubbles coming up? It's filling every last little crevice inside there. This will prevent what they call a dry start. Okay, and why take chances? You know? I never heard of a mechanic saying he was not going to use oil because he didn't want to over oil something. So make sure she's good and saturated, all the air is out of there. That way it has a nice clean film of oil when you go to start it. Now, as far as break-in is concerned, it's a roller cam. You got roller tips on the rocker arms. There's no break-in. It's not like a 60s flat tappet cam where you have to run it in. As soon as it pops in, you hit the starter, you can go ride it. Okay, the cam's back from its swim. It's pretty much just the reverse order of what we did to take it all apart. Make sure the back bearing finds its home. It may take a little wiggling and finagling. It's starting to find its spot there. And you ever encounter resistance, you'd never want to just force it. So I'm going to fool with this a little bit off camera, make sure I can get it home. Okay, new cam's in its home. And what I always like to do with any machine surface, any new installation, I like to turn it over by hand and feel what's going on. And it feels good. It's running true, no binding. So we're ready to go forward with our installation. Okay, moving right along. Have both rocker arms reinstalled. Have the retainer plate reinstalled. And I'm about ready to put the cam sprocket back on. Alright, got the cam sprocket back on. Now one of the things you want to check before you even put the bolt on is that your timing marks are still lined up. So here you can see the timing mark through the inspection cover, and here you can see that I'm one tooth off. Don't get upset if this happens. This is the key point about having patience. You may not get it the first time. I'm only one tooth off there. I eyeballed it, I got it wrong. But pull it back off, move it one tooth, check it again. We'll be good to go. Okay, so I'm sure most of you that have been following along can already tell that looks better already. So we're going to check our timing mark. You can see it in there. You may not be able to see it. This light is not cooperating with the camera. But we can see plainly that we are lined up top dead center. So I'm going to reinstall the cam bolt. Don't forget about our washer. I believe Honda's torque on this is 25 foot-pounds. before I even do that, I'm not going to forget about the cam chain tensioner here at the bottom. I'm going to retighten that. And then we'll go ahead and spin this thing over a few times, make sure everything is happy where it should be. Actually, before we do that, we'll probably check some valve clearance, but we're getting close. All right, just turning her over here, making sure I don't feel any weird resistance. Feel any resistance, stop, because you're putting probably a valve against the piston. You might be off a tooth or two. This is just another check verifying what you've done. Make a couple full revolutions, which I've done. Put her back on top dead center, and we can go back to putting everything else back together. One thing to keep in mind, when you put the rocker arms in and you check the clearance, don't freak out. There's going to be in excess of probably an 1/8 inch of clearance on both the intake and exhaust valves. Don't freak out. There's plenty of adjustment that you can take up that slack and get the proper clearance that's built into the rocker. So don't think there's something wrong, that you did something wrong, you put something back together backwards. It's just the way it is because of the smaller base circle on the camshaft. We talked about that earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and do my valve adjustment and put everything back together, and hopefully here in a little while I can hit the key for you guys. Well, here it is. I've already had it running. I've already had it out for a ride. Tried to make the part of the video where I started it up after I got everything buttoned back up, and for some reason I screwed up with the camera, so I don't have that for you, but it did fire right up and settle down to a nice idle, so no surprises there. Got a little bit of a choppy idle, which is kind of cool. And took it on the interstate actually tonight, and actually passed a car. This thing, when it was bone stock, it did 59 laying on the tank. I mean, full tuck, as hard as it could go. The Yoshimura fuel, the full exhaust system, the Chimera intake tube and filter, and the Power Commander 5 brought it up to 68. It'll do 68 miles per hour with me, you know, full tuck. And now with the cam swap tonight on the interstate, it was 73 mile per hour banging off the rev limiter. So it looks like they're a 16 tooth front sprocket, or we're going to raise the rev limit and go with the upgraded valve springs that Crowder recommends. Not quite sure yet, but pretty happy with that. You know, for bang for the buck, you know, picking up 5 miles per hour, that was a pretty simple little install. So hopefully this helps anybody who's thinking about it. If you're thinking about doing the camshaft, it's definitely worth your money. It turns it into a totally different bike. From 6,000 to 8,500, this thing is, it's totally different. It feels like it feels like you put a big bore kit on it. It feels like a different engine. Really pulls hard. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Go ahead, leave comments, questions. I'll be checking in on the video from time to time. So take it easy.